Free will, is it an illusion, or reality? It is one of the most prominent philosophical debates in history. I wanted to create this video in response to the many free will videos which argue that science believes the universe is deterministic and thus conclude free will does not exist. Let's begin by defining free will. The definition of free will is an important part of the debate because altered definitions will affect the logical flow of the arguments. I am not normally in favor of redefining terms. However, in this case, free will is a concept which is naturally defined by the nature of the debate. So, I will attempt to define free will as we naturally perceive it. I believe that is the most useful way to logically study free will. So, free will is the conscious control to make choices, which creates the potential for multiple future outcomes as perceived prior to the beginning of the decision mechanism. The important part here is the idea that it has the potential for multiple outcomes. When it comes to free will debates, it is natural for the concept of determinism to play a key role in the debate. Its definition is also crucial when it comes to the logical flow of the debate. So, we will now look at the definition of determinism as we naturally perceive it with respect to the free will debate. Determinism is the concept that the universe is governed by causality in such a way that the future of the universe is already determined based on causal laws of science. More specifically, it requires that the future is 100% determined. Notice that I have left predictability out of the definition. Predictability is often part of the argument with respect to determinism. Ultimately, predictability does not matter. Whether or not we, or anyone else, have access to future information is not required by the concept of determinism. What is important is that the universe behaves in a predictable way 100% of the time. However, no one in particular is actually required to make the prediction. Notice that this definition of determinism and the previous definition of free will are incompatible. That is, free will cannot exist if the universe is governed by determinism. That is why the subject of determinism plays such an important role in the philosophy of free will. This leads us to the paradox of free will. Three principles are the cornerstones of free will philosophy. First, we all experience the perception of free will. I doubt that anyone would argue that they do not at least perceive free will. Secondly, the universe appears to be governed by determinism. Humans have a natural inclination for understanding the universe in terms of causality. And certainly, it cannot be argued that the universe at least appears to be dominated by one long causal chain of events. Thirdly, the concepts of free will and determinism are not logically consistent. This is indisputable if the terms are defined as we naturally perceive them. So, we are left with a paradox, a set of logically inconsistent statements about our universe. As a result, three natural counterclaims have been devised to attempt to resolve the paradox. First of all, free will might just be a complex illusion of the mind. This is a reasonable point since there is no possible way of proving that we could actually make a different choice than the one which history records. Secondly, the universe might not be completely deterministic. That is, even a few rare breaks in the causality chain would be enough to make free will a possibility. Finally, free will might actually be compatible with determinism. We'll discuss this one in more depth shortly. This leads us to discuss the main philosophical positions since they are based on these three principles and counterclaims. First, however, we should take a quick look at our philosophical axioms. Logical proof must be based on a set of axioms. Here are two axioms that I hold true which are relevant to this argument. The first one states that there exists one universal truth independent of our actions and thoughts. More precisely, the truth is the same for you as it is for me and is not fabricated by our thoughts. Also, the truth exists regardless of whether or not we are capable of knowing it. The second axiom states that paradoxes do not exist in the truth. They are the result of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge. All paradoxes can't therefore be resolved with improvement in knowledge. This axiom was used in a previous slide, which leads us to the main philosophical positions on free will. Determinists contend that deterministic laws of causality govern the universe, and they also believe that determinism is inconsistent with the concept of free will. Thus, free will does not exist because the world is deterministic. Libertarianists agree that the determinism is inconsistent with free will. However, they contend that free will exists. They believe that this is possible because the world is not purely deterministic. Hard incompatibilists, also known as pessimistic compatibilists, refuse the concept of free will, despite their disbelief in a deterministic universe. Hard determinism, libertarianism, and hard incompatibilism are forms of incompatibilism because they share the notion that determinism is incompatible with free will. Compatibilists, on the other hand, believe that the universe is deterministic and that free will exists. They do not agree that there is an incompatibility. Let's begin with incompatibilism. Here, we looked at the definitions of free will and determinism. Based on these definitions, free will and determinism cannot be logically compatible if our first axiom about one universal truth is held true. Compatibilism is the philosophy that free will and determinism are both true. They must, therefore, conclude that the two are in fact compatible. To do this, and remain logically consistent, they are forced in some way to redefine either free will or determinism. This may involve the use of free will being an illusion or that determinism has loopholes. In fact, they often contend that determinism is a necessary part of free will. Ultimately, free will and determinism as I define them are incongruent. Thus, I refute compatibilism. However, this does not mean that compatibilism is an incorrect view. Compatibilism leads to a different stream of logic because of the difference in definitions being used. I do not believe that redefining the terms in such ways is productive. In terms of the natural definitions of free will and determinism, compatibilism fails. Now, let's look at hard determinism. Humans have a tendency to comprehend the world through causality. This ability proved to be highly valuable and led to the notion that the universe is deterministic. The Enlightenment age brought forth an abundance of empirical proof for determinism. By the start of the 20th century, classical physics had developed to the point where many felt science would be a closed book soon. There were still a few loose strings, however, and at the pace that progress was coming, it was felt that a universal theory of everything was just around the corner. Furthermore, classical physics was completely deterministic. So, it comes as no surprise that the concept of determinism became extremely popular. In recent years, we often hear an analogy of a supercomputer that could potentially calculate the future based on laws of physics and the hypothetical ability to input data on all the particles in the universe. This, of course, is only a thought experiment, but it demonstrated the scientific view of the universe prior to the modern physics era. Then, the deterministic bubble burst. The few unsolved strings in classical physics, when investigated, ended up completely unraveling the scientific notion that the universe might be deterministic in nature. Quantum mechanics was born. The mathematical model for quantum mechanics is non-deterministic. It is entirely probabilistic and fundamentally non-causal. Furthermore, atomic processes such as atomic decay and spontaneous emissions can only be described as random. The development of QED led to particle physics processes, which are non-causal and random. Quantum entanglement experiments proved non-local effects, something which is disturbing because we cannot fully interpret the physics based on our intuition of causality. Best of all, we have Schrödinger's cat. The paradox intended to disprove quantum mechanics. It failed, however. It left us with the concept of a collapsing wave function, a concept for which I have yet to hear a satisfactory explanation. Of course, the hard determinists contend that at the macroscopic level the universe is still deterministic. They believe that quantum mechanic processes average out statistically and that the fundamental non-causal, probabilistic, and random nature of the world at the atomic level is irrelevant. Unfortunately, the classical laws of physics, which they base determinism on, are only approximations to reality. They are very good approximations and they are simple. That is why science continues to use them extensively. However, the principle of uncertainty is still applicable to the macroscopic world and is a limitation on classical physics.